Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Welcome. This is the Podcaster Community Show, short conversations that are not just about podcasting, because I like to take the scenic route. Our guest today is Adam Greenberg. Welcome, Adam.
Hi, Kirk. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I had a chance to talk to you. I talked to a lot of people, but I had a chance to talk to you. You asked a very interesting technical question. So let's start on the tech stuff before we fly off on tangents. You asked a question about creating a podcast, so a series of episodes. You wanted to make a show, but you had a need to, I'm going to say, hyper localize it. You needed to do it, or you wanted to do it in multiple languages. So it's the exact same content, but in different language localizations. So the first question I'm going to start with is, what was that project? Because that's a very interesting, what's that use case?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And I appreciate the help of yourself and the podcaster community in that question.
Did we actually solve? I don't think we actually solved the problem, though. I think the answer was, yeah, that's not easy.
Well, no, a lot of you did offer helpful suggestions. And I think I did. It's somewhat resolved now. So background,
Use case.
yeah, right. I have been, and I will be continuing to be. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Zambia from 2018 to 2020. Living in rural Zambia, working with small-scale fish farmers. But some of the work that Peace Corps volunteers do also revolves around HIV/AIDS education, malaria outreach, things related to health, and so on. So we had this idea to create a podcast as a tool to help Peace Corps volunteers facilitate discussions with people who often live in rural areas who do without much access to the internet. So this is a podcast called HIV-positive Voices, and it's a way to help facilitate discussions and support groups for people who live with HIV, and often local language, and also speaking local languages, right? So as Peace Corps volunteers, it helps that we learn the local language. But there's a huge opportunity to reach people who can't share their story because of geography or access to the internet and so on.
So so people listening going, wait, what is any of it in English, or is it all entirely in?
Good question. Sure. So there's an English feed, and that was sort of the question, the tech question that I came to you with, was that we wanted to make separate language feeds for each different language. Zambia has 72 tribal languages. The official language is English because of colonization, which is helpful as a Peace Corps volunteer. But multiple languages, and then theoretically, we can continue this and expand it to other countries that Peace Corps volunteers work in. But
so the challenge to unpack for people listening, the challenge was, does that mean I have to make 7 different podcast shows, go to the Apple directory, submit 7 different shows, have 7 different, for example, Simplecast accounts that cost money? Or is there some way to create localized language per language feeds, words, language?
Right.
So keep going.
Yeah, I mean, basically that was the question, and what I've come to so far is, because this was, it was only in 2019 really that we were only a few episodes in before COVID forced the evacuation of all Peace Corps volunteers worldwide. So the project was really only getting started at the time. So there are now multiple feeds of different languages, but I started doing them myself, which I can manage it, but also, other Peace Corps volunteers are joining in with me. And so it's kind of hopefully a decentralized process in which anybody can record a track with their local support group, that if somebody there wants to share their story, and of course it could be anonymous, or they can, give their name and talk, because they're talking about, very tough stuff. But the response, people like, the ones who have listened to it have been very grateful to hear these stories. So other volunteers could help record in the local language, translate it into English, and then other Peace Corps volunteers can take the English, or anyone anywhere theoretically, right, and then just record it in another local language. So there could be multiple tracks. But yeah, right. Would it be seen in Apple Podcast or in search as like one show under the heading of HIV positive voices worldwide? Or would each one have to be like, kind of redundant and,
Yeah.
you know,
So did you come up with a solution? How did you do it? Like, did you? I mean, the one way to do it would be like self-host it, because then you can have as many individual RSS feeds. But then that's just like the poor man's way of making 27 shows. But now what? You go to Apple with 27 URLs. You got to go to the podcast index. Got to go to Spotify. Got to. So how'd you end
yeah,
up doing it?
right. And you know what they pay us in the Peace Corps, right? As a volunteer. I'm a
Mhm.
frugal guy. I'm a frugal guy. Um, I've been making websites for years using, I started with AOL Hometown and GeoCities, and then
Mhm.
Weebly and
Mhm.
WordPress. So like all those free methods. This is self-hosted currently on my personal website as a subdomain. And I did that in part because like I knew if I enthusiastically started this project when I'm not a Peace Corps volunteer anymore, or if it was tied to a certain domain,
Right.
who's paying for the hosting of this continuing on? So like I know that I'm going to keep my personal name, going. So like I could host it as a subdomain, which is what I've done. Um, and yeah, but so exactly, yeah. How many feeds can you have? So I'm using WordPress.org and the is it the Blueberry plugin?
Yeah, I
I
always
haven't
go because it's missing
Berber
vowels.
something.
It's
Yeah,
missing
something like that.
vowels. It's a blue.
Your listeners know the one. Yeah.
It's blueberry, but there's vowels missing. Some mumbleberry.
Right.
Yeah, there's a plugin for WordPress which bends WordPress's built-in ability to generate an RSS feed for your posts, and it adds all of the additional tagging that is expected if the RSS feed is supposed to describe a podcast. There's a couple of plugins that do that. And I'm guessing Blueberry lets you have multiple, they probably call them series, lets you have multiple series, and each series has a feed. And then you can go to Apple with the one that's in English, and you can email, like you can take the URL and mail it to your friend and say, go to your podcast player, hit, add manually and paste in the URL, which is really cool. Cause then the Peace Corps volunteers out in the fields can add that, hit all the downloads when they have Wi-Fi, and then head out to wherever they're going. Nice.
Yep, that's
Excellent
the vision.
solution. I always joke I'm going to make a little audio bumper for a turn signal, like just to indicate I'm about to turn left.
Uh-huh.
When
Sure.
you and I were talking before we started recording, because on a totally different topic, you mentioned that you have experience as an editor, a copy editor in book scope. And you mentioned the excitement of creating, writing, recording podcasts versus going back and like listening to them or cleaning them up. And I'm wondering, has that dichotomy, that tension between those two, has that held you up, do you think, as your own uh, podcast creation? Are you making a show separate from the HIV positive show, but you haven't pushed the deploy button because you don't want to edit it? Or like, how does that tension between those two things play out in your podcasting journey?
Sure. Yeah, I think many of those things, right? Um, so yes, as you started with, I'm an editor. I work with authors. When I read, I see typos in books everywhere, right? So it comes very naturally to me to be a book editor. Ironically, I've gotten really into audiobooks um, and listening to those quickly and so on. So I digress from editing, but in regards to editing
Well, you
podcasts,
don't hear the typos, right? I mean, maybe you
right?
can, but you don't see the punctuation errors.
So with podcasts and other content, yeah, I've had the idea. So my girlfriend and I have been traveling we lived abroad for 7 years, practically before the Peace Corps, or 5 years with it. So, well, I mean, I've had ideas for years of regarding our travels, and we have video content and audio content that we've recorded, and yeah, it's for me in that regard. The excitement of creating content is a moment. Oh, wait, this would be great. We should share this, and then it's like, well, I don't want to really go back and edit it, or the process of getting it off my phone onto my computer into a way that is organized. The whole process of editing, that's tripped me up. Um, and what I've noticed and what I'm realizing is with the HIV podcast, doing that podcast for the community for other people is motivation for me to like I knocked out those episodes in like, the same afternoon.
Hmm.
Because but when it comes to telling my own story or my own ego of like making it about me, I don't really want that attention necessarily. So I know this would be interesting, but I also like don't care to make it about me.
Well, maybe it sounds like all that's missing is a why, a WHY question mark. Like
Right.
the thing that you're, I'm going to say dancing around creating, maybe it's good that you're dancing around creating it, because if you had a clear reason to create it, it would pull you along like the project, that did get published. That one pulled you right through. So maybe it's just a matter of brainstorming on
Yeah, and also I tend to have I get a lot of ideas, and I go off on a lot of different
that.
interests, and I've started many different small businesses and side projects and so on. So like, I'm like maybe some people who what is it? Sagittarius people like
Mm,
love to start projects but not necessarily finishing them as
I don't know.
easily.
I'm a Virgo.
I don't really know what all of them mean, but
I don't either. I just happen to know based on my birthday. I think I'm right at the edge of Virgo. But anyway, sorry.
yeah, I know that's so like I don't know much more about the science. Yeah,
Hmm.
but yeah, that's finding the motivation, finding the why to make these other podcasts, or and even just logistically, like the questions of how do I organize these folders on my computer in a way that make me want to come back to this, uh, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and you know or
I,
having a computer in which your RAM feels very slow when you open up GarageBand. So like,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. There's so many, you, every, in podcasting, but in every other, like write a book or create a video or start a YouTube channel, it's just technology rabbit holes. I mean, it's just a Swiss cheese field of it's all holes, there's no cheese. And one of the things, I've just coined a new thing. It's all holes, there's no cheese. That's one of the things that I see, and this isn't just my observation, but that I see a lot in the podcasting workshop is a big part of what the coaches and the remarkables do is go, don't go down there. Just go around that. We'll do that later. Like just go this way, because otherwise it just beats you down of all these open questions. And I didn't realize when I started podcasting, which is before I got involved with the Akimbo course, when I started podcasting, I had no realization that it was going to be a creative endeavor. I just didn't, which sounds stupid now that I say it, but I was not expecting it. And that creative endeavors take tons of energy. So maybe there's also some internal pushback that you're giving yourself about, as somebody who edits books and is like intimately aware of that process of creating a book, maybe you're going, yeah, I know like what's going to be involved if I'm going to create something out of all this raw material to be able to polish the diamonds.
yeah, yeah, and it's also that there are ways in which I organize my editing, that can apply to podcasting. So it's not necessarily just like logistically how to do it. It's like, well, am I motivated to do this right now?
Hmm.
Um, you bring up an interesting point about coaches directing us towards like don't go down that rabbit hole. I mean, rabbit holes. I mean, in the past I've gotten into cybersecurity rabbit holes recently. Like I'm all about like password managers and so on.
Yeah.
And I've also went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. So
Hmm.
like I know about the importance of the opposite of rabbit holes, which as you said is like focus. And like there's a book I did the alt MBA, and I forget which book it was, but it was one of the books that Seth and the team send out before you begin the alt MBA, and talking about boundaries, right? The importance of
Hmm.
purposely setting smaller boundaries so that you work within a box, because otherwise, if it's too broad, you get lost,
Yeah.
swimming in the ether.
Well, the rabbit holes are also, yes, I agree. Plus two, the rabbit holes are also, you know that you don't know what's in it. So it's like, yeah, I could step right over that, but that one might be important. I mean, I see 500 other ones in the field here, but like, is this the one I step over, or is that the one that I step over? And having somebody, who can provide some mentorship or some guidance, and say like, you can step over that one. You- and you go like, okay, like, and I think that just having somebody that you trust to say, this is a battle you want to pick, or this is a thing you want to go deep on, um, which makes me wonder, where do you go, if anywhere? Hopefully, not causing any existential dread here. Where do you go for mentorship, or do you have a core group, or is it your partner? Is it like, what do you do when you're like, I got too many choices?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would like more mentors. I'm at a point in my life where I've realized, yes, I there are a lot of variables of my experience in which not many people have been in my position at my age with my experience, in the sense of like, what's next for me in my life, right?
Mm,
Um, I yeah, so I could use some mentors. I'm realizing that. Um, but I have friends and people along the way that I also talk with and so on. But like, it's a different kind of understanding about like what when you have financial success, things related to accountants, right, and
right.
lawyers, and or versus like things related to relationships and marriage or buying a house, like stepping stones of career and life experience. And yeah, I'm in a non-traditional one myself.
Mm.
How did you come
And
to podcasting?
I didn't intentionally deploy silence. I was thinking, but it's cool. How did I come to podcasting?
No, I
This
mean, I don't
story,
want to,
no, it's cool. Like I tell people before, you can curse, you can political, you can push back, ask your own questions. How did I come to podcasting? Some people will know this story. I'll do it quickly. I started in 2011. I, the way I put it is, I began a personal journey rediscovering movement. What happened was, I had a friend who went, you should come out and try this parkour thing that I'm doing. And I went, what's that? Looked at some, I don't even know if it was
right.
YouTube back then, looked at some videos, went anyway, and started at 40. So it's an out, usually
Cool.
done outdoors. It's a movement activity. And I fell in love with it and wound up starting to travel, because I was an adult when they're all, hanging out with people half my age. Super fun, super great. Like,
Yeah,
changed who I
good
was as a
for you.
person, is awesome. So I'm having all these cool conversations, sometimes with people half my age, sometimes with the rare few people my age. I started
Huh.
traveling, went to some other countries, eventually went and talked to the founders, all the people who started it, hung out with them. And the more conversations I started having, the more people started standing behind me. And at one point, I was at an event in France, and I was having a conversation with somebody, and somebody behind me went, literally after 10 minutes, we were walking from one place to another. And the person behind me goes, dude, that should have been a podcast. I would have listened to that, because I was talking to one
Uh-huh.
of the founders. And I had the guy that I was talking to, I knew from elsewhere. So it was just this pleasant conversation. It wasn't like an interview. It wasn't like I wanted something from the guy. He wasn't trying to
Right.
proselytize me. We were just talking. And shortly after that, in 2015, I started a project to try and share written content. And I built a website, and I was translating using Google Translate and trying to share. And I realized, duh, Craig, writing is hard. People know that. Nobody wants to write. I pissed off, figuratively speaking, I pissed off like 300 friends, like begging them to answer my questions and write for me. And some people did it. By 2017, somebody said, dude, why don't you just do Skype calls? And this is before Zoom, just do Skype calls and translate it. And I was like, I mean, transcribe it. I was like, oh, all right. So that's like how the podcast started. So the podcast, my first podcast, started in very early 2018, February, something or other. And I started recording conversations around parkour. And I would talk to somebody who was a well known athlete or who was from my local community. And we would just have these cool conversations. And then I'd drive into New York City and have one there. And it just became fun. And I was literally just pressing record. I had a buddy who would, for a few bucks, would do the final mix down for me. And I was just a bozo with a recorder and two microphones. And it just got out of hand. Just
Yeah.
got out of hand. I got really good at the technology part of it. I discovered I apparently have a good voice for it, and then I like
Sure.
know how to play to my strengths, and off I went.
Yeah. Good for
I
you.
wound up
That's awesome.
taking, yeah, I wound up taking one of the Akimbo courses when I already had a show that was like at 50 episodes, and I went in and basically tore the show apart and rewrote
Right.
the intro, and like had a chance to hang out with 300 people rabid about podcasting. Since then, I've started two other shows, and the problem continues.
Yeah,
So
that's
for
fun.
me, I backed into it. I literally realized that it was easier to record a video call and then transcribe it to get what I wanted. It was easier to have a conversation and then try to get the writing out of it. And then afterwards, I was like, "Oh, that's hard. Just save
Right.
the thing." Um,
I
so I
appreciate so much of that. As you said, like just talking, having a conversation, making it natural, like what you're
yeah,
doing here, right? You said, you don't edit this. You basically just put out the conversation as it is. And I think that's wonderful. And maybe that's something that I should explore more of, uh,
people
because
make audio journals. There's a whole
it's
bunch of
just,
options.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, the
Yeah.
downside
Well,
of you making me
I
tell that
appreciate that
story.
insight. Sorry. Go
Downside
ahead.
of
Yeah.
you, no, that's good. The downside is now we're out of time because you made me talk,
Ah,
but it's all good.
well, I
Um,
didn't mean to cut you off before.
no,
But
I'm delighted to hear that your HIV positive podcast got out in the world. I'm super excited to hear that that happened. And I look forward to seeing what, if anything, you would create. I think it would be cool to hear you just go do an audiobook, like, take what you know about podcasting and work on an audiobook. I think that would be cool. But thanks for taking the time to join me today, Adam.
thank you, Craig. I have appreciated talking with you, and I appreciate the technical considerations. It's helpful.